And now I am going to go to you, and I'm going to make you the host. And I hope it will allow me to keep recording. I think it will.
We're in good shape.
All right.
Right. Well, that 2-minute break allowed me to catch my breath from running up the stairs. Well, welcome everyone to Project Echo Dementia for October 13th, Friday the 13th. What could go wrong? I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you can see that okay. All right. As is our custom, we'll do some opening notes and reminders. We'll do some introductions. We have a wonderful new program manager, Samantha LaFontaine, who will be taking the reins from Allison. It'd be great for her to get to know you and you to know her. We have also a fantastic didactic from our own Karen Hayes around the Dementia Caregiver. And then the good Dr. Gaster has agreed to present a recent case. The other thing I will share is that we will certainly have folks join us over the course of our session, and you are always welcome to check out the recordings if you ever come in late for clinic or other reasons. So, a couple of Zoom reminders, even though we're all pretty fluent at this point. If you haven't already, if you could rename yourself with your first, last name, and whatever clinic. You can also put that in the chat, I think. We have all, at this point, looks like, mastered the art of muting the microphone when not speaking. It's a small group so far, right? But certainly if you say your name when you unmute, that's always appreciated. Everyone's got their video on, don't need to say anything about that. It looks like it's only kind of one person per site. So, but if anybody joins you, if you could put their name into the chat, just so we can keep track of who's here for CME and other purposes, that would be lovely. I want to bring your attention to a couple of other learning opportunities, including the UW Traumatic Brain Injury Behavioral Health Echo, Psychiatry and Addictions Echo, and the Telebehavioral Health Training Series. These will be in the slide deck in case you ever need the links. Also, the telephone consultation for the pain and opioid provider consultation hotline and telephone series. We also do everything we can to protect PHI, and we'll ask the same during any of our discussions. So not sharing any sensitive information that might reveal identities for patients or family members. And then, boy, you know, the surveys have been so helpful, and I keep thinking I should share some of the data that we've collected over the last 3 years, and I will at one of these times, but they have really helped us reiterate or kind of refine and revise this program to try to make it optimal for our learning community. So really appreciate you filling those out. We've got, and that's the right date, is that right? Allison, looks like the 17th. Perfect, yeah. So, yep, we've got Dementia and Sleep, which is a revisitation by Lena Fine from Swedish, who did a fantastic didactic on this earlier. Our own Lynn Courtney will be doing an update around our state plan, which was recently finished. And then our own Dr. Eisenberg will close out our calendar year with a didactic on women's brain health. And we are working on at least the first quarter of 2024, hopefully the first 6 months. Case presentations. Having just gotten back from the Meta Echo conference, I'm thinking about changing the name from case presentations to practice dilemmas, because I think you know, people aren't cases, and I think we all have dilemmas in our practice. So maybe stay tuned for that. But the updated contact information, should you have a practice dilemma, is Samantha's email, which is here. Also be receiving reminders and the follow-up emails from that email address as well. I see Dr. Gaster has a hand up.
Just a thought. I mean, so this comes up because of the case that I'm presenting today is not necessarily a practice dilemma. And so I'm just like, I would put in a plug for us to present cases that are sort of like interesting to discuss and that I think we could all learn from, even if there's not like a specific dilemma. And so I think just in terms of sort of thinking out loud about rephrasing, I mean, they are cases, but I guess, you know, but something. But I would just widen our net for interesting patients to discuss, that they don't necessarily need to be dilemmas.
Sure. Yeah, we'll continue that discussion. I'm sure there's some kind of a term that will maybe cover all of it, but happy to keep talking about that. All right, we are accredited for CME for 1.25 credits. We have no disclosures, either our presenters today or the planning team. Here is our hub team. We'll go through and do some introductions here in a second. Here are all of you out there around Washington and in some of our bordering areas. And with that, maybe this is a good place to stop sharing. Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to stop sharing. And let's do some introductions, just so we can get to know Samantha a little bit and she can get to know you. So I'll start, I'll model the introduction here. So I'm Chris Rhodes. I'm a neuropsychologist and associate professor of neurology here at the University of Washington, and have been the co-lead of this wonderful project since its inception in 2020, June 2020. And I'm going to call on, I'm just going to kind of go in order here. How about Allison?
Sure. Allison Schreier, and I have been working as your program coordinator with Echo Dementia.
You have been so invaluable to this program, and we're so fortunate that you are able to stay on for a little bit as we make this transition. So we will celebrate you properly at the next Echo session. Wear a fun hat. How about Mimi?
Mimi Pattison, hospice and palliative medicine with Virginia Mason Franciscan Health.
Great to have you here. And Karen Hayes, you're up. You're next. I'm just going to introduce you when you do the didactic. Go for it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Hayes. I am a nurse and a midwife, but I was asked to join the Echo Dementia group as my role as a caregiver. I cared for my husband for 8 years, who had presumptive Lewy body dementia, and got to know and love the care team at Harborview, which is how I got to know a lot of these good people.
And I bring such an important perspective, and I think we're all going to learn a lot about that today. So thank you for doing that. And just thank you for your time and expertise too. Trang.
I am Trang Lee. I'm a clinical pharmacist at Overlake Hospital Senior Health Clinic.
See you again. And Barack.
Hi, I'm Barack Yasser. I'm a primary care doctor and dementia expert at the University of Washington Medical Center at Roosevelt. I'm the director of the Cognition and Primary Care Program.
Excellent. Good to see you. And Karen Clay.
Hello there, Karen Clay, social worker at the Memory and Brain Wellness Center based at Harborview.
See you too. And Kimmy.
Hi, I'm Kimmy DeMono Riley. I'm a neurologist at the University of Washington Memory and Brain Wellness Center based at Harborview.
See you. And Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Kane. I'm the Director of Care Management at Aging Wisdom. We're a private care management firm that serves the greater Seattle area. Nice to see everyone.
Nice to see you. And thank you again for presenting a case not too long ago. Much appreciated. How about Christina?
Hello, I'm Christina. I'm a geriatric fellow at Swedish First Health.
Good to see you. And Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Kristen Childress. I'm a nurse practitioner with the Manette Clinic in Bremerton, and I'm also an associate teaching professor at the School of Nursing at University of Washington.
Great to see you as well. Welcome back. I was hoping you're going to introduce yourself longer so I could try to remember how to pronounce. I think is it Thais?
It's Thais.
Thais.
Hi.
Okay.
My name is Thais. I'm a nurse practitioner with Ripple Care. We're a startup telehealth service based out of Seattle. We provide hopefully wraparound dementia care.
Wonderful to see you again. Welcome back. And then last but not least, we've got somebody joining here. We'll let Janine get connected to audio. Janine, welcome. We were just going around doing introductions. So do you want a second to kind of settle in, or are you ready to introduce yourself?
Sure, Jenny Simon, nurse practitioner at Providence Elder Place in Seattle. I do home visits.
Awesome. Thank you and welcome back. And then last but not least, Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha LaFontaine. I'm going to be taking over as the program coordinator here at Project Echo. Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit about where you're coming to us from and your background?
Sure. So I have experience in program coordination and program management, mainly in the sexual health space. I've worked with youth and young adults into adults, and my last role was working in with adults living with HIV.
And wonderful experience in some community clinics as well, including CMAR, which we're very fond of here. So, all right. Well, thank you all for taking a couple of minutes. We started out this program doing introductions, and it got really big at one point. Cases are always, requiring lots of conversations, so we skipped them. But it's nice to revisit that, especially as we get to know Samantha and she gets to know you. All right. So with that, I think instead of sharing my slides again, I'm just going to go ahead and let you, Karen, share yours.
Okay.
And again, thank you for bringing this didactic to us around the dementia caregiver.
All right, does everybody have that full screen? Great. All right, so for those of you who might be fast forwarding on the recording, my name is Karen Hayes. I am a doctoral prepared nurse and also a midwife. And then in 2015 took over a role as care partner for my husband, who was diagnosed with presumptive Lewy body, and he died last April at age 71. So this presentation is, of course, a lot of my own experiences and feelings about being a primary caregiver, as well as gleaning a lot of information and themes from all the many support groups that I've been a part of in this past 8 years. And then also being a nurse, I had to go into the literature. And so I kind of reviewed what was in PubMed for the last 5 years. I did a 5-year limit on that explosion, I'd like to say. Very impressed with the explosion of research on dementia caregivers in the last couple of years. So any of the references you see on my slides referring to articles and research studies, you should be able to find in PubMed. So of course we have to have learning objectives because this is a CME thing. So there they are. There's going to be a lot of information on these slides. There's even more information on the slide deck that's going to get uploaded onto the Echo Dementia archives. So if you want more information about anything that I kind of gloss over or quickly visit and then move on, please access that slide deck, which will have more specific notes on it. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the clinic visit. That's kind of a lot of the reason we're all here is how to be in a clinic visit with someone who has a dementia diagnosis and their caregiver. Hopefully caregivers are included in those visits. That was one of the things that attracted me to the Memory and Brain Wellness Clinic at Harborview. Was they said we don't see patients without their caregivers. So I realized early on that they recognized the value of that. And so here's the beautiful Helen Mirren, and I grabbed these two photos just to ask the question about, can you tell by looking which one of these caregivers is coping? And I'll tell you the answer, which is no. I just noticed in my own journey, the more I tried to keep myself, looking socially acceptable to go out in the world and so forth, people weren't recognizing my distress and how much I was actually sinking. And so I just started stripping away the makeup and stripping away doing anything with my hair and wearing schlubbier clothes. And then people actually saw me and said, "Oh my God, you look terrible. What's going on?" So I just thought that was an interesting sociological experiment, but one that worked for me. But I just want to reiterate, and of course we all learn this in medical and nursing school, but you can't tell a book by its cover. So how people present in clinic isn't necessarily what's behind the curtain. So that's basically the point of my first bullet point, is that we caregivers run around with an internal conflict all the time. Is we want to be a good care provider, we want to be seen as a good care provider, we want to look like we're on top of everything, but we also need people to acknowledge and explore our distress and when we're drowning. And so that's just an internal conflict we're always trying to balance. Something that is a theme, well, my own experience, and then also a theme with a lot of the support groups that I've been in, and little groups that I've created myself with some new friends who also have spouses with dementia, is it's really frustrating for us when we go into a clinic visit and the person with dementia is still being treated as if they have complete autonomy. And I know it's really tricky because they're adults and they've had autonomy and been able to consent to things all their lives, and now it's different. There is a little bit of literature out there saying how the caregiver role for someone with dementia is really different than somebody who has cancer or ALS or some of these other diseases where you have somebody caring for you, but you're still able to make your own decisions. And so what we want you to know is that the patient's not a reliable historian. They will answer all kinds of answers to you really confidently, and we're sitting there shaking our head going, what? That's completely not true. So we need you to check in with us. There's a concept called showtime. I don't know if everyone's familiar with it. We use it in the Lewy body community all the time. There's good times, there's bad times, and there's showtime. And I don't know about the other dementias, but certainly with Lewy body, when our loved ones go out in public or go to clinical visits or whatnot, somehow they come out of their dementia and they're like looking all together and everyone thinks they're doing great. And then that's just not the case at home. It's also very exhausting for them. So just be aware of that. You might think somebody's doing great, but definitely check in with the caregiver, because that might just be a 15 or 30-minute showtime that you're seeing. And then we don't need to go into medications. We have lots of conversations about medications with dementia, but I'll say from the caregiver standpoint, the polypharmacy situation, and then just the losing ground because there isn't any curative medications for dementia, that kind of creates a confusion and distress around medications. And even me having a doctoral degree in nursing, it got quite complicated and took a lot of effort to make sure that that was going well. The other thing, I'm sure you know this, but caregivers do turn to peers for answers, and that may or may not be helpful, but they often don't feel like they're getting the answers that they are looking for in a clinical visit. And so they jump into these chat rooms on Facebook or whatnot. And if it's a moderated online thing, it's better, but there's just all kinds of stuff going on. And a lot of these groups are international. So what people are using in the UK or Germany or South Africa or something might not be medications we have here. So there's a lot of information that doesn't quite fit our context here. And then just lastly about medications, just being aware that the risk benefit ratio changes with medications, as we know, as dementia progresses from MCI to severe and end stage. And we spend years, like, oh my God, no Haldol, no benzos, no narcotics. And then all of a sudden, sometimes you need to do a 180 and change that idea of what's okay and what's not. And so just be aware of that. If you're starting to recommend things that the caregiver has been told, don't use that, it's going to ruin their brain. That'll take just some extra counseling and information for them to get on board. And so here's some things that we don't or we won't tell you as caregivers. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to have adult family services called on us for saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. But here's some of the stuff that goes on. We get trained to stop asking for help because a lot of the help that is offered or that comes to us is just makes our lives harder. We could do a whole talk on that, actually. So if you see somebody who's resistant to help, that might be what's happened to them. They're not just being stubborn or obstinate or whatever. Everybody out there is doing alternative therapies, whether that's the light helmets or treatment for chronic Lyme disease or all kinds of supplements or nutritional approaches, or the last one I heard was some kind of crystal in the umbilicus. All people are doing all kinds of things because we're desperate out there and because there is no cure. And it's our experience that allopathic practitioners aren't really interested in it, kind of get waved off, or, oh, that's not evidence-based and it's not really discussed. But just know that these are a lot of things that we're trying. And we'd actually appreciate if there was a little bit of interest. Everything's futile, even the stuff that allopathy has to offer, because nothing cures dementia at this point. So it just having a more holistic interest in what the couple is working on is of interest. And then the dark secrets that are the same for anybody in our society, inappropriate sexual behaviors that the person with dementia might be doing might not be revealed, or certainly abuse that we suffer in the hands of our spouse or the person that we're caring for, or abuse that we perpetrate. More getting written on this. I think it needs a lot more research. So I referenced this article here if you're interested in more information on this. And then our fears of isolation, financial ruin, and disability mortality. A lot of that's the 2 a.m. can't turn your brain off. Sleep disruptor. And just so you know, in these support groups, I'm kind of shocked to how often I hear the homicide, suicide, morbid fantasy of like, I don't know what else to do. I'm just going to strap him in the car and drive off a cliff. This kind of stuff does get expressed in places where people feel safe to express it, but my hunch is they're not expressing it to you. So just being open to that. I can't recommend any particular question to ask around that, but just knowing that that might be in the back of a caregiver's brain as they're sitting in the office with you. And then in terms of resources, caregivers turn into the boiling frog in the pot, where we don't really notice the heat getting turned up until we're actually boiling and dying. So it's great to keep offering resources, but when people say no, it might not be a total insightful declination. So if you see people pushing off resources or saying, no, I don't need that, I don't need that, just probe a little bit. I mean, maybe no is no, but maybe no is just that I'm hopeless and I don't think anything's going to help me anyway. And the idea of some kind of resource just feels like one more thing that I have to do. And I just don't have any bandwidth left for that. So a little bit of exploration in that would be great. And the reason I know this is when people eventually get referred to palliative care or hospice referrals, it's amazing how all of a sudden the light comes on and it's like, oh, there's all these resources and they'll come and do a massage, or there's respite care. And it's like, it's not that they didn't know that before, but maybe they weren't ready or they couldn't hear it. So that's always interesting to me to watch how people respond to somebody actually coming in and saying, here's all of the things, and I'm going to help you get them. All right, so that was a lot of the anecdotal stuff that I had to share, just from being in the dementia caregiver community for almost a decade. But now, what does the research say? And I want to point you to this Young article. It's published this year. It's in the Journal of Family Practice, and written for family practitioners. So hopefully that's a really relevant and up-to-date article for you all to check out. A few bits of quantitative data for you that 25% or more of dementia caregivers are sandwich generation, which means mostly women who are caring for elders as well as younger people. It might be children or it might be adult children who haven't quite left the home yet. And so that's what should I say, getting it from all sides. Also, the disease stage doesn't necessarily correlate with the level of caregiver stress. And I didn't really think about this until I started reading the research on it. And sometimes it's the early months or years that are more distressful as people's identities are changing and caregivers are giving up their lives and their careers and so forth to do the caregiving. And then sometimes it is at the end, getting more and more stressful as you're more and more burnt out. But just keep that in the back of your mind, that the level of caregiver stress might be coming at the beginning or in the middle as again, as the curtain's getting pulled open for them and what this is really going to mean in their lives and fearing for the future. Different types of dementias create different type of burdens. That's not rocket science to kind of think of that as a logical precept, but one thing I do want to talk about, and you guys can correct me if I don't know how to pronounce the word, anosognosia, is that right, Chris? Where the patient doesn't perceive that they have a problem or that they have a disease or that they need help. And that's super, super, super frustrating for us caregivers, because we're seen as intrusive and busybodies and butting in, when we can see and everybody else can see that the person needs help. sometimes really basic help, but they either out of stubbornness or just disease process can't admit that they need help. And that's super demoralizing. So just recognizing that's a phenomenon that may be going on with the duo that you're seeing. So financial anxiety and peril is very common. Caregivers give up income, they give up Social Security, wage income. They spend retirement, or they don't save for retirement, or they deplete retirement accounts. They might sell their house to be able to afford this care. And so it's not uncommon for spouses, again, mostly women, to end up impoverished after the dementia journey. So just keeping that in mind when finding resources and recommending, these new drugs that are going to cost, $100,000 or more in early dementia, just getting some kind of CPA involved to say, okay, let's do some little financial planning here, because people might need that money for later as opposed to earlier. This was an interesting statistic. 40 to 75% of the total cost of caring for a person with dementia comes from unpaid informal caregivers. And we want to do it, and most spouses and family members don't expect to get paid, but it's pretty significant what we're doing for the caregivers that's never recorded anywhere, while it's impoverishing us. And then of course that other fear at laying awake at 2 a.m. is fear of our own possibility of becoming disabled or dying before the patient. And this does happen. I tried to find a good, I always hear 60%, but when I looked in the literature, I saw things from 18 to 70%, but I can't tell where those numbers come from. But obviously it's a phenomenon that can happen. And people need to be thinking about that and especially in terms of putting it in their legal paperwork. Who would be the successor caregiver? Something that's not normally in the paperwork. All right, so the voices of caregivers. So this is the qualitative data that I'll summarize here. There's my husband and me. That's a year before he passed away. Perfect physical shape. It was just his brain that was dissolving. Everything else was perfect for this guy. His name was Scott. So I'll just briefly summarize here. The mantle of responsibility, I thought that was a good phrase that came out of one of the studies. It can never be paused, even if our loved one goes into respite care or we get a little opportunity for an afternoon away. The mantle of responsibility is never lifted, even after they die, because then you have to deal with all of that as well. And we progressively deprioritize our own needs. That's something that everybody knows, but definitely watch for caregivers who are just doing a crisis mode lifestyle, unable to plan, or this, what I'm hearing now, because my husband ended up with severe dementia and then end stage, and my friends are sort of coming along with me with their husbands, it's mostly wives with husbands with the dementia, switching to survival mode. You see that you're doing everything, and then all of a sudden you hit a wall and you're like, okay, I'm just getting through the day. I'm not doing anything extra. I'm not, and there's a retraction of caregiving that happens as the person needs more caregiving and you're already burnt out. So I just call that survival mode. That's just my own phrase. And I talked a little bit about bringing in helpers. They can be super great when it's the right person, and it's just really awful and horrible when it's the wrong person, or they're just a poor fit. And this is just a whole problem across the nation. It's not dissing on helpers, because they also are experiencing a lot of low paid jobs and stress in their own families and so forth. But yeah, sometimes a lot of people find it easier just to go it alone, because there's a lot that can stress us out from bringing in helpers. So people are always saying, get more help, ask for help, get more help. That's not always a helpful thing to say. You got to dive in deeper if you see people aren't able to do that. Here's a couple articles I just want to point you to, the Bergdorf article and the Kahn. I think these were great in terms of coming up with themes of actually finding out what dementia caregivers want and need. And I love the idea of the self-efficacy, the confidence attributes. And this is a nice jumping off place for having conversations with caregivers. If in case you're stuck, you're not sure what to ask them or how to engage them in meaningful conversation, these are really good topics, and just assume they're going to be interested in these, because these come from the dementia caregiver communities in the research. And then in terms of diversity literature, I have a slide a little bit later with some references. But these caregiving fact sheets are really great. They're little one-page fact sheets about all kinds of different caregivers: the solo caregiver, the LGBT, African American, Asian American, all different kinds of fact sheets for you to look at. So there are caregiver assessment tools. You may or may not be using them in your practice. I know that the Memory and Brain Wellness Clinic always had a clipboard for my husband and a clipboard for me to find out how I was thinking about things. And I love this little cartoon because it just kind of summarized me really well. So the burden assessment tools, we've been talking a lot about burden and all the downsides of being a caregiver, and there are quite a few out there. The Zaret seems to get referred to the most in the research, but there's all kinds of ones out there. And then I loved finding the positive aspects of caregiving tools. This was really uplifting, and I think both of these kinds of tools could be used to try to create a frame that, again, it's not all gloom and doom being a caregiver. I mean, it might be all doom, because there's no cure, but it doesn't have to be all gloomy. There's actually some fun stuff that can happen as well. And it can be very gratifying being a caregiver. And a lot of people end up saying it was the best thing that they ever did in their life. Not everybody says that, so I wouldn't assume there's a silver lining for everybody at the end. But I love the positive caregiving. So this is just an example of a slimmed down Zaret burden interview. And this is an example of some of the questions they asked for. How is dementia a positive influence in your life? And again, you could institute these scales, these interviews in your, in a formal way in your the validated tools in the practice, or you could just use these as scripts to help you coach yourself on things to ask the caregiver, and things that you can incorporate in usual visits. And believe me, the caregiver will love you for it. They will sing your praises if you spend, 30% of the time of the visit focused on the caregiver, because that's not the norm for us currently. So primary care practice models. I'm not going to say too much about these because it's super complicated, but just here's some systematic reviews on some of the innovative stuff that's going on out there. Nothing's jumping out as being like the care model that everyone should follow for dementia. But if you're interested in this kind of stuff, if you're a care planner, a clinic planner, a translational researcher, health services person, then I encourage you to look at some of these articles for what's working on there. And I love that family practice is considered a key provider, focusing on the family. You guys all know that. And I want you to know that's super, super important and can be the center of the person with dementia and the caregiver's healthcare. Palliative care, which we all know and love. We've had talks on this and so forth, but here's a really good article published in 2022 with some nice quotes in there about how that's valued by caregivers. And then here's the list of various demographics, research articles on the Hispanic community or the Black African American community, rural versus city, blah, blah, blah. There's more out there. Obviously, this isn't exhaustive. I just looked back for the last 4 or 5 years. But there are, if you're looking for some specific information, here's a place to get started. So resources to consider. These are just general topic categories. Obviously, disease-specific national associations are important, but also there's a lot of caregiver action networks and alliances and so forth out there. So here's just a few that I've looked at and interfaced with and like. Obviously, any referral you can do to OT, PT, speech T, neuropsychologist. There's actually a good article pumping the value of neuropsychologists being involved on a regular basis with dementia patients and their caregivers. So that was great to find. Palliative care and hospice, as early as you can refer, please do. Don't wait. The average amount of time people spend on hospice is 2 weeks, and that's not enough time. Caregiver needs that way, way, way sooner. So look for rapid decline, weight loss, trouble swallowing, even if it's a soft call, you can always refer to hospice and they'll decide. They'll take them or they won't. And one hospice might reject somebody and another hospice will take them. But dementia is definitely a hot ticket for hospice. in terms of getting on early, and that's really helpful to the caregiver. And then research study participation, I'll talk to my dying day about how important that is, not only to develop new knowledge, but also it's just more attention. Research people are actually paid to spend time and really look at specifics. And a lot of people, caregivers or with loved ones with dementia, get a lot of benefit out of that. Legal financial services, we've had Echo Dementia talks on that before, so I'm not going to go into the details here. I'll just say again, planning for a successor caregiver is something you should remind people. And the other thing, now that I'm a widow, I'm finding out, oh dear, this is a problem that nobody tells us about, is when the person dies, if it's been kind of a traditional marriage or traditional relationship where one person is on all the accounts, those things get shut down. All my widow friends, I'm widow number 2 out of 6 this year. And everybody's had problems with banks shutting things down, can't get credit. One person, their electricity got shut off. Yeah, it's just, yeah, the widows and orphans get left behind, I guess. But anyway, this is stuff I need to do a whole nother talk or write a book or something about, how get your affairs in order isn't just a living will and a advance directive. There's a lot more to think about before the person loses capacity to sign paperwork or dies. So the local community aging dementia places, you may or may not have in your community. We have lots going on in Seattle. But let me just say a little warning, it can be problematic for young onset and or introverted folks. My husband was young onset and he didn't like these daycare places because everybody was old and he just didn't feel like he fit. So that's an issue that I'm discovering even in the big city here. Peer support, obviously trying to get the caregivers into support groups, but I'll tell you what ends up happening. Support group might be great, get lots of good information, but we end up finding our peers within those groups. And I think that's the value. So if you can get people into some support groups, they can find the 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 folks that they want to peel off and have a ongoing. And so I have some support groups like that now that have been going for years, and they're my best friends now. Assistive technologies, we've had talks on this. They're not for everybody, but some of these can be fantastic. So the more you're familiar with them, the more you can help people problem solve and choose the ones that'll work for them. And then I spent a lot of time looking at all these meta-analyses and systematic reviews with programs and training for dementia caregivers. Upshot is there's some small to moderate effects with certain ones, but it's pretty contradictory in the literature right now. Pretty much anything's better than nothing, but they don't really know what the best programs and training are yet for dementia caregivers. So recommendations, these might be things you're already doing, and I'm going to just go quickly because we're going to wrap up time here. My recommendation is that each visit say at least one of these things to the caregiver. Ask them what the hardest thing is that's happening, or ask them about anything positive that's been happening with their caregiving. And always, always, always please do some kind of praise phrase. This can be a ray of sunlight in a dementia caregiver's day, week, or month. If you just say how so impressed you are with how they're doing or something, that really lifted my spirits. Whether or not I believed it is a whole nother psychology thing, but it really does help to be praised. And other thing, medications, ask how the caregiver is doing it, not just if the patient's taking their medications. You'll find a lot of poor practices out there. Always writing down, anytime you make a recommendation, make sure you write it down on a sticky note and give it to them, because when we get home, all of a sudden everything that happened in clinic visit isn't relevant anymore, because we're just taking care of the crises that are happening every 5 minutes at home. Again, research studies, I can't say that enough. Not misinterpreting showtime, we talked about that already, but just know that that's a phenomenon, and always check in with the caregiver if what the patient's telling you is accurate or not. Caregivers, I thought this was a nice phrase. Caregivers want to be an additional patient, not an invisible patient. If you are in family practice and the caregiver is also your patient, you can maybe do back-to-back visits so that you get twice as much time with the 2 people. That would be great. Plus, the caregiver also needs medical attention usually as well, because they're ignoring themselves. And then documenting in the medical record, we all know all the patients always want that. So in conclusion, so this is my sweet Scott. This was the weekend everything changed. He changed from being a dementia patient into a psych patient, and that's kind of how he was until he died. This was his last 3 months, and you can't see the rest of the picture, but he was in 4-point restraints at this point. So it ended very stressful for us. So conclusion, if you blanking out on everything I just said in the last 20 minutes, these are the 3 take-home messages. Just recognize everything changes all the time, so keep checking in. Initiating meaningful, helpful conversations is really what caregivers are craving from you. And you can use this Khan article as a leaping off point for things to talk about, or use those scales for your scripts. And I do want to recommend this responsive dementia care. I don't know the Whitworths or the publishers, but everybody that I recommend this book to uses it as their Bible. As soon as they dive into it, they're like, oh my God, this is so helpful. It's all about dealing with behaviors. It changed my relationship with my husband from a really stressful one into a much more positive one his last couple of years. And everybody I buy it for, give it to, loves it. And the last point there is we've already talked about that, but stage of disease, the peer support needs to be at the same stage, because people who are in end stage dementia aren't great peer supports for people who are in early. It's really different what people need from each other at that point, what peers can give to each other. So that is even though the stage of disease might not correlate with the level of distress and burden, the peer support needs to be stage related, in my opinion. All right, that's it. Here's some selected references for you to look at if you're interested in more caregiver information. And otherwise, I will stop sharing and call it done.
Erin, I want to thank you for such an incredible blend of the personal and the professional here. And I came to this from the partner support group from Adapt right before this.
I was in Chris's class. That was the first the first support group Scott and I did together, and I'm still in touch with a couple of those folks.
Yeah, well, you've given me some things to take back on Monday, so I want to thank you for that too. Barack.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really, really powerful, and I learned a lot. And a question I have that just it comes up so often, and I would just love to hear your perspective, is the whole question of how to navigate when to have a conversation with the patient present versus with only the caregiver present. I mean, and obviously there's no right,
there's no
silver, there's no sort of bright line where it's like,
right,
here's when you should be and this is when you shouldn't be. But I just like, and especially comes up so much with like advanced care planning, when you're like really talking about like, goals of care and, what code status and just like really hard issues like that. And would just love to hear your perspective on that,
Yeah, so a couple things I'll say about that. One is, I think, and I'll just talk about the spousal relationship because that's what I'm familiar with, but obviously a lot of caregiving is a daughter or son, adult taking care of a parent. But I think if the duo has a relationship where the person with dementia totally trusts the caregiver, which thank God that was my situation. My husband and I had a lot of hard conversation in those first years, and it really paid off because in the later years, whenever he would get fussy about something, I'd say, honey, do you trust me? And he'd say, yes. And I said, okay, so here's what I'm thinking, what we need to do. So, so I see that's not the case in all couples. And sometimes the person is, because of the disease, possibly they're paranoid, they're trying to kill me, they're trying to get rid of me, da, 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 da. And in that case, having separate conversations, I think, are important because the person with dementia can't make sense. They're in this whole other perceptive world, and they can really, really misinterpret what the two people in the room who have, quote, normal cognition are talking about. And so I think peeling off the caregiver whenever you can to say, hey, I really feel like we need to be talking about these things. Is it best to do it with your loved one in the room with us? Or is this a better thing that we could have a Zoom by ourselves or a phone conversation if you can't be face-to-face clinical with them, because then the person might get suspicious, like, oh, they're having an affair in there or something. I mean, there's a lot of weird, terrible things that happen in the minds of the people with dementia. So yeah, I would check in with the caregiver and just ask them, is this something I could talk about everything in front of Scott. And again, he was a doctor, he was an anesthesiologist, I'm a nurse. We talked since almost the day we met about how we didn't want to die and, you know, how we didn't want to be a vegetable and blah, blah, blah. So we were able to have these conversations just, I think, because our profession and because of our sort of straightforward personalities, but not everybody's like that. And then the other thing is, I'd say, obviously earlier the better, especially, and I just got into this, I'm in a support group on Tuesday afternoons on Zoom, healthcare providers who are caring for people with dementia. We have our own support group. And it was interesting, the different perspectives of, oh, when you're, quote, in your right mind before dementia, and you say, this is what my advanced directive, I don't want to be intubated, I don't want nutrition and fluids, blah, blah, blah. You can say that. And then when you get dementia, moderate, severe, they can't do abstract thinking anymore. So they can't even conceptualize the future. They can't conceptualize their own death. They can't conceptualize anything because there's no abstract thinking ability. And so asking questions about that kind of stuff, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you know, do you want IV fluids right now? They're just in the moment. So that stuff has to happen early. And if it didn't happen early, you just have to work with the caregiver and educate them to what that means. Do everything you can, doc. What does that mean? Obviously, we do that with all our patients, but I don't think the person with dementia is capable of having a consenting kind of conversation around that. And I believe we have to go with what they would have wanted. I would tell people, if Scott could go out of his body and see himself right now, he'd just be like, what the heck, Karen? Why aren't you putting a pillow over my face? I told you I didn't want to be like this. So I tried to keep that in mind of what his wishes were when he could think for himself. And your hand's up again, so. Oh, you're muted, bro.
If anybody else has a conversation,
Okay.
has a question, they should go first.
Second you.
Okay. And you know, I think one of the most take homes for me was your mention of the book Responsive Dementia Care, and I'm definitely going to sort of order it right now.
Changed my life. Yep.
The book that I have been recommending for all these years is the 36-hour day, and I've always been like a little bit kind of like frustrated by it as sort of the gold standard that we should be recommending. Can you say a little bit about how the Responsive Dementia Care book compares to the 36-hour day book?
Yeah, 36-hour day is a little bit more of a manual on all aspects. The Responsive Dementia Care is specifically about behaviors and was written by Whitworth and Whitworth. And the man, Whitworth, his wife died of Lewy body dementia. And then he married this nurse who was a dementia caregiver nurse person. And so they wrote this book together. And so, of course, I was always looking for things appropriate for Lewy body, but they call it Lewy body and other dementias. And when you read it through, it's like, oh, these are behaviors that anybody with any kind of dementia could have. Frontotemporal or Alzheimer's or vascular, you know, there's but it's chapter by chapter on topics, and it says, you know, here's a very lay person's explanation. Here's what's going on in their brains. This is how they're probably experiencing the world, which is different from you. That's one of the best things of people forget they're not perceiving the world. They're not taking in and they're not reacting in their normal adult brain. Everything is different. And so the world you live in is not the world they live in. And so once you realize that, and they do some nice explanation about that, and then they say, here's the attitude you need to have about this, and here's some actions to take. And so it's a very to-do sort of workbook approach that gives you skills right now. I could read one chapter, and most of the chapters are like 6 to 8 pages long. They're in little bits and bytes. You can go into the chapter, you know, what happens when your loved one starts being violent with you, or won't eat their dinner, or starts, you know, peeing and pooping in the living room instead of the toilet. There's all those things, super practical, super exactly what a caregiver needs. So like I said, when I started giving that to people, they're just like, within a day, they're emailing me, calling me, saying, oh my God, this has changed our lives. And it really helped give me, like, I was doing some things, I think, from my nurses training, some things maybe intuitively, some things just the way Scott and I worked on our relationship for 36 years and how we talked with each other and could communicate with each other. But once I read the book, I felt like, okay, I'm doing the things that are actually recommended by the experts. And the thing that I've been doing for the last 5 years was actually kind of the wrong thing. And then once I turned that around, it really made our last couple years really easy until he went psycho and got violent. But until then, that was just the disease taking over. We had a pretty nice couple of last years. And that book really helped me.
And how would you know until you read it? Mimi, what do you think?
You know, I couldn't agree more with Barack using the term powerful presentation. Karen, thank you so much for each and every one of us to take away. And I think we all promise you we will. I particularly appreciated your comments on palliative care and hospice. The hospice benefit was never designed for dementia patients and is in such need of restructuring. And we are working on that. And you've got to find a hospice that's open.
Yes.
To caring for dementia patients. And I'd like to think we are, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. 2 weeks on hospice is not hospice.
No.
It's crisis symptom management.
No, that's a hospital bed and some Haldol and morphine. That's pretty much all it. And the caregiver has no time to take the benefits from it.
And there's so much to benefit from. So Karen, thank you.
Yeah. And then the other thing with hospice is now it's turning into a money-making thing. And so
I know
the whole hospice landscape is changing. And I'm a little trepidatious of some of the things that are going on out there. But yes, I agree. Hospice was not designed for dementia, but it needs to be, because here we are. And the future is upon us.
Exactly. Thank you.
I want to point out a couple of other resources that are in the chat in terms of some other books and guides. We'll be sure to send those out with the resource lists in addition to the expanded slides. Are there any other things we should talk about? I'm realizing we have about 20 minutes. And Barack, I'm wondering if that's enough to address the case. We'll say case.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, this case it's pretty sort of like garden variety, but you know, there's always stuff to sort of think about and discuss and learn from cases that don't immediately have a dilemma to them. And so, I mean, I'm happy to share it if we have time, happy to share it or save it for another day when we need a case or a person to sort of talk about. So I happy to go either way. This is there's not like a big, huge, giant sort of like
political need.
Yeah, right. Or complicated things to kind of like unpack. It's relatively, but I mean, but every one of these situations is hard, and so I guess that to some extent, I think that's some of the interestingness of it.
Yeah, you know, and no case is too small, no case is too complicated. So let's chat about it.
Okay, great. So I'll share my screen. All right, and so this is an 89-year-old man who was new to me, and you know, I think I'm maybe like some of you where I have had to be really careful about not taking on more patients with dementia onto my long-term panel because I'm sort of oversubscribed in that way. But every once in a while I will see somebody for what I kind of think of as a I will help get you started while you are in the process of looking for a new primary care provider. So this was like this was that situation where I was seeing him and his daughter for the first time, with the main concern being memory concern. And so this is a gentleman who was born and raised in the US, but has lived in Japan for really most of his life, retired from the US Air Force. He divorced his first wife more than 20 years ago, and then he remarried not long after that. Has a very strained relationship with his second wife, just lots of mistrust and maybe some paranoia. And so what prompted this visit was that he somewhat kind of abruptly left Japan just 3 weeks prior to our visit. And with the help of a friend, he somehow arranged to travel to stay temporarily with his daughter, who lives outside Seattle and is apparently saying now that he wants to relocate to the US permanently. But the daughter shares that he actually has done this before, where he kind of like ups and sort of arrives at her house, and then sort of not very long after ends up returning to Japan. But this may be sort of the more permanent move. And the daughter's been really concerned about her father's cognitive function over the past 5 years. And the patient does say, yes, some concern about memory, but he can also become pretty defensive about this and really describes his move to Seattle as being oversight of my health. There's been some sort of questions about delusional paranoia that are, as often the case, kind of hard to really unpack, so that over the past 5 years or so, he's been voicing concerns about his wife's sister and possibly his wife as well, kind of being sort of out to get him, and using like very specific sort of concerns / accusations about poisoning his food, wanting to get at his life insurance payment, possibly take control of his finances. And as we all know, it's always really hard to sort of tell, is this, are there kernels of true concern? Is this really delusional? Or maybe they really are out to get him, and it's so hard to tell. And he is somewhat impaired in terms of his activities of daily living. And so it's always kind of amazing to hear a story like this, where how did he manage to fly from Japan to the United States by himself? But he did. But he's not really able to do his taxes anymore. He's not really able to drive anymore. He's not really able to cook anymore, but he is still sort of dressing and bathing and toileting. And so I went through the cognitive checklist that I recommend to all primary care providers, asking about alcohol, mood, sleep apnea, hearing, and visual hallucinations. And really none of those sort of like jumped out as a big possible contributor to cognitive impairment. He's been pretty healthy, for a 89-year-old, and is on a lot of the medications that many 89-year-olds are on. And just a little bit more about his social history is there. And I think the key is that he's got 3 kids, but really only the one in Seattle, the Seattle area, is the one that he really is like kind of really connected to. He did not graduate from high school, which is important when it comes to the MOCA test. His exam was pretty unrevealing, specifically looking for any Parkinson types symptoms and or signs, and they weren't there. But then, doing MOCA testing, he scored very, very low on the MOCA test, and it was actually 1 point below that. But I did add a point because of his less than 12 years of formal education, and so then the daughter says, yes, he's definitely showing signs of cognitive impairment that I was able to combine with the MoCA test to really make a presumptive diagnosis. And so I guess before I get to kind of my assessment and plan, let me sort of pause and see if people have thoughts, suggestions, questions.
The questions from our community before a team jumps in with questions? I have one. All right, I'll ask it. Ethnicity?
He is, I don't know for sure, but he presents as maybe sort of a Black mixed race would be my sort of guess.
That was going to be my guess, or my question also. That MoCA of 10 may not be a 10, but especially with less than 12 years of education. But.
And Barack, do we know if he got any care in Japan? Was anybody working this up, or does
yeah, I mean he had an internist there, and he did come with like reams and reams of chart notes, and and there was just like there was concern. He never had like formal specialist workup. There was a lot, especially a lot of, I mean, I think that this was on a military base that he was getting his care, and so there were lots of legal concerns about, is he safe? Is he, how much of his concerns about safety are real or not? And so there were like, many pages of that I have to admit I did not have the time to fully sort of read completely.
And has he accessed any VA care here yet?
No.
I guess it'd be good to find out what he's eligible for. Some of the people in my support groups are military wives, and once they get through all the paperwork, which takes a long time to get approved, there's actually a lot of resources, and they get paid for taking care of the vet with dementia. And that depends if the dementia is service related or not, or I don't know what all the deals are. I'm not a military wife, but that might be something the daughter needs to start exploring.
Chris, can you say more about your comment about the MoCA test?
Yeah, so we don't have great. We've got some normative data for African Americans. I was going to ask if he was African American or Black, but for age, oh boy, I'll have to look it up specifically. I think it's like from 65 to 75. The median MoCA was 17 for African Americans with less than 12 years of education. So that 10 is probably abnormal, but that might be in the MCI early dementia range for this population. And this gentleman's 89. Right? How many years of education does he actually have? Like 10?
Yeah, I actually don't know. All I know is he didn't graduate from high school.
Yeah, and then there's the quality of that education too, depending on where he lived and grew up. So again, I wouldn't, that 10 raised an eyebrow, but it may be more of a, again, mild. Certainly doesn't fit with flying to the US from Japan. And boy, we can maybe revisit our MoCA talk with some of the normative data for different populations, because you really do need to adjust it depending on who's sitting in front of you.
And so here is what I decided, which is that, and I think, this is just like the important thing of being able to sort of make at least a presumptive diagnosis. And that is something that, it was interesting reading through all the records from his doctor in Japan, where there is that sort of like super common typical thing of kind of everybody sort of dancing around the, like the elephant in the room, which is that, there's definitely progressive cognitive neurodegeneration, and his lack of independence is marked, but hard to really sort of like be sure about, I guess. And so this was the diagnosis that I made and the workup that I recommended to them. And I think that the daughter was feeling very overwhelmed because she did not really feel capable of having him continue to live with her, and really was wondering, where he should go and how he should sort of manage. And and she was really like thinking, doesn't he need like a memory unit? And I was very much advising that my hunch is that isn't the right thing to be imagining for him now, just because he's so much better functioning than most of the people that would be in a memory unit, that he would probably really chafe at being in a setting like that, and that really that something like an assisted living setting would be much better, and that encouraged her to try to find an advisor or agency to help her navigate that, and then also really encouraged her to meet with an elder law attorney, because I think that he does have assets that really that they need help sort of navigating control of those. And just for along those lines, have really wanted to offer up, soon now, a letter from a healthcare professional saying, this is what I think the diagnosis is, and that there really is a high concern that he's not able to manage his finances independently, and that a letter like that, I have found, is often very helpful when meeting with an elder law attorney. And did make a referral to a dementia specialty clinic. And then I have a little bit of follow-up after that. But any questions or thoughts, suggestions?
I had a question. I was curious that, based on your evaluation and the letter that you wrote, do you anticipate that could get in the way of an attorney thinking he had capacity to execute documents, or you didn't feel that was an issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I my main concern was his finances. And and I think and so like so I don't know. It's a great question, though.
But you need something.
Yes. I mean, my instinct is that it is better to have a letter like this that can help them to try to set things up, and that does kind of lead a little bit to a little bit of the follow-up that I can give you. But it's sort of, that's a great question. Does anybody else have sort of thoughts or perspective on that?
Yeah, this is Karen. The other route, and again, the elder law attorney will know more about this than me, but it's getting guardianship. If he can't sign the paperwork to say what his wishes are, then daughter could be legally assigned to be his guardian. Otherwise, they're a little bit in the weeds in terms of her being able to make medical decisions and financial for him.
So here's the follow-up. So they did end up, so I got a message from the son-in-law who reports that the patient is getting defensive around any suggestion that his memory is not good, and that they met with an elder law attorney and they couldn't finalize the DPOA after a whole hour and a half, because just mentioning the notion that it was needed to help because of his memory and brain not be working as well as before, like really sort of like made him feel very defensive, and he didn't want to sign. And so their plan was to return with him to the attorney on a different day, and see if they can sort of, without using those trigger words, see if he would sign the durable power attorney for finance paperwork. And so in this situation, it sounded like them having that letter from me was useful in terms of sort of navigating sort of what the next steps will be. But, you know, as Chris has talked about in his talk about capacity, just so hard and difficult to know like what the right steps are, and this actually also kind of like, you know, really brings up a lot of the questions that Karen was bringing up in her talk today about, you know, what is the insight that people have into their own impairment, and to what extent is that you know, normal and adaptive versus how much of it is actually maybe like a sort of a, you know, a pathophysiologic symptom of their neurocognitive degeneration. It's just hard.
Yeah, so I'll make another plug for the VA. There are a couple of quote soldiers' homes that will take people who have dementia. But the wait list is like 2.5 years. So, but you have to be in the VA system. So I think going to the VA and I don't know how people get a provider in there or whatnot, but that could potentially open up a lot of options that are in place. It's bureaucratic, but in place for people exactly like him. That right now the family's just kind of like we all do on the outside. We just make it up as we go along, and we're lucky or we're not in terms of finding the right people to help us and the right resources at the right time.
Speaking of those people, I realize it's 1:29, but I'm looking at Karen Clay on the screen here, and I'm wondering if there's anything you want to add here, Karen.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, Barack, I'm wondering if you have, that you probably already did this, providing some of those dementia resources to help the family kind of understand what's there and what some options are to kind of help hold their hand. As part of that.
And you may end up meeting them, Karen.
Yeah. Welcome to.
Well, thank you so much. We are at time, and I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you, Brock, for bringing this forward. There's just a good reminder that with every case, there's so much to talk about, so much to think about. I did find both of the articles that established the cutoffs for non-Hispanic, African-American, and Black older adults, and that number is 13 for less than 12 years of education. So not the 26 we're used to. I'm happy to send those resources out. So, and of course, that number also changes for our American Indian, Alaska Native, and Latinx populations as well. And Karen Hayes, thank you again for what a lovely presentation, and just your giving of yourself. Link to the surveys in there. Thank you, Allison, and thank you all for sticking it out to the bitter end here at 1:31 on Friday, October 13th. We will see you next session for Lena Fine's talk, I think it was. Is that correct? Yeah. Friday, October 27th. And then one session in November and one in December. Take good care, and thanks again.
Hey, Chris, can you give the hostship back to me so I can turn off the recording?
No, probably. That's it.
Okay.